wait as the White Walkers and his approaches. Tonight we fight and die in honor.
What if Ragnar Lothbrok showed up to Westeros, and nobody told him the Iron Throne was somewhat cursed, filled with endless troubles, and that kings who sat on it oftentimes do not know peace? Will he and his armies be able to face the Night King and his Night Walkers and still be alive? I found this story very entertaining, that at 2 a.m. I was still awake, crossing the dots. Now, it's up to you. Tell me what you think. Let's get into it.
Conquest is easy. Survival is where legends either die or are truly born. Ragnar Lothbrok had proven something the Seven Kingdoms thought impossible, that their greatest city could fall not through armies or dragons, but through understanding that power was just collective belief, waiting to be shattered. He'd sat on the Iron Throne, claimed King's Landing, broken the illusion of Westerosi invincibility, and in doing so, he'd painted the largest target in the known world on his back, because across the narrow sea, Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, breaker of chains, mother of dragons, rightful heir to the throne Ragnar now occupied, was coming with fire and fury that had turned cities to ash. Because in the north, Jon Snow, the White Wolf, king in the north, the man who'd faced the army of the dead and lived, was rallying forces to reclaim the capital from a foreign invader who didn't understand what honor meant in Westeros. And because beyond the wall, patient as winter itself, the Night King was marching south with an army that couldn't die, couldn't be reasoned with, and had waited 8,000 years for humanity to fracture exactly like this. 3 impossible threats converging on one man. 3 forces that should have been enemies of each other, united only by their desire to end Ragnar's reign before it truly began. The Viking had conquered King's Landing through cunning and chaos. Now he would learn if those same tools could keep him alive against dragons, destiny, and death itself. The gods were watching, and they were curious to see what happened when a man who didn't believe in thrones faced everyone who did. The real war was about to begin. The sky above Blackwater Bay turned black with wings. Drogon came first, massive, terrible scales like obsidian reflecting morning light as he descended toward King's Landing with the inevitability of a falling star. Behind him, Rhaegal and Viserion followed, their roars shaking windows and sending citizens scrambling for shelter. On Drogon's back, Daenerys Targaryen surveyed the city that was hers by blood and birthright, now occupied by foreign raiders who'd stolen it while she was an ocean away, building armies and breaking chains. The insult burned hotter than dragonfire. "Your Grace," Tyrion's voice crackled from the speaking tube he'd rigged to communicate with her in flight. A Westerosi innovation even Ragnar admitted was clever. "I urge caution. This Ragnar isn't like other conquerors. He doesn't want your throne. He doesn't respect—" "I don't care what he wants," Daenerys interrupted, her voice carrying the cold fury of someone who'd survived assassination, betrayal, and exile to reach this moment. "He sits on my throne, rules my city. That ends today." She guided Drogon lower, toward the Red Keep's courtyard where her scouts reported the raider held court. Around the city, her unsullied forces were landing from transport ships, establishing perimeter positions with the mechanical efficiency that had conquered slavers and toppled cities. But it was the dragons that mattered. The dragons were fear made flesh, power absolute, the answer to every military problem Westeros had faced for 300 years, until now. Drogon landed in the courtyard with earth-shaking force, his massive bulk making the stones crack beneath his weight. Daenerys remained mounted, using height and the implicit threat of dragonfire to establish dominance, a tactic that had worked on every enemy she'd faced. Ragnar Lothbrok stood waiting, flanked by perhaps 20 warriors, absurdly outnumbered, impossibly outmatched, yet showing no fear whatsoever. He studied Drogon with the expression of someone examining an interesting ship design or a new type of weapon. Curious, not terrified, curious. "You must be the Dragon Queen," Ragnar said conversationally, as if they were meeting at a tavern instead of a standoff that could end in fire and death. "Tyrion mentioned you, said you'd be upset about the throne situation." "Upset?" Daenerys' voice could have frozen dragonfire. "You invaded my city, conquered my kingdom, sat on the throne my ancestors built, and you think I'm merely upset? Your throne." Ragnar tilted his head. "Interesting. I thought it belonged to whoever could hold it. That's how thrones work in my experience. Temporary ownership until someone stronger comes along. Then you understand why I'm here." Daenerys felt Drogon's heat building beneath her, saw smoke beginning to curl from his nostrils. One word from her, and this Viking would be ash. Bend the knee. Swear fealty to House Targaryen. Leave Westeros on your ships and never return. Do this and you live. Refuse. Dragonfire flickered and burn. The Vikings around Ragnar shifted, hands moving to weapons. But their leader raised one hand in a gesture that stilled them. He walked forward, actually walked toward Drogon, toward the creature that had reduced armies to cinders, showing no more concern than if approaching a horse. "Magnificent," Ragnar breathed, studying Drogon's scales up close. The trader's stories didn't do them justice. Living weapons, flying death. No wonder your people thought them divine. "Last warning," Daenerys said, but something in his absolute fearlessness unsettled her. Every enemy she'd faced had shown fear of the dragons eventually. Slaver masters, Dothraki khals, merchant princes, all had broken when confronted with fire-made flesh. Kneel or burn. Ragnar met her eyes, really met them, seeing past the queen to the woman who'd survived horrors to reach this moment. And what she saw in his gaze wasn't defiance or madness, it was understanding. "You think I haven't faced fire before?" Ragnar asked quietly. "You think dragons are the most terrifying thing in the world? Dragon Queen, I've walked through burning cities. I've fought warriors who would die rather than surrender. I've faced gods and monsters and things that make your scaled pets look tame. Fire," he smiled, "fire is just another element to conquer." "Then burn," Daenerys commanded. Drogon's throat illuminated with building inferno. Heat waves distorted the air. Every eye in the courtyard watched the moment that should have ended, with Viking ash scattered across King's Landing stones. But Ragnar didn't run. Instead, he did something that would be talked about in Westeros for generations. He charged directly at Drogon, directly into the path of dragonfire that could melt steel and stone. And as flames erupted, he dove through them, not away, through, rolling beneath the initial blast, using momentum and the split-second gap between Drogon's breath weapon cycling, coming up on the dragon's blind side with a spear. Where had he gotten a spear? that he drove into the gap between Drogon's shoulder scales. Not deep, not lethal, just enough to hurt, just enough to make Drogon roar in pain and rear back, just enough to prove that even dragons could bleed. Daenerys screamed as she lost balance, tumbling from Drogon's back, hitting the courtyard stones hard enough to drive breath from her lungs. Unsullied rushed forward immediately, surrounding her, spears bristling toward the Vikings who'd surged forward to support their leader. But Ragnar raised his hand again, stopping his warriors. He stood there, clothes smoking slightly from his passage through dragonfire, bleeding from a dozen small cuts, where heat had found exposed skin, but alive, impossibly alive. "I told you," he said, breathing hard but grinning like a madman. "Fire doesn't frighten me. Your dragons are impressive, terrifying even, but they're still just animals that can be hurt, bled, defeated by someone willing to be crazy enough to try." Daenerys stared at him from behind her unsullied guard, and for the first time since she'd walked into fire and emerged with dragons, she felt genuine uncertainty. This man had just survived dragonfire through sheer audacity and tactical thinking, had wounded Drogon, her Drogon, the largest dragon in the world, with nothing but a spear and timing. He wasn't an ordinary enemy. He wasn't a slaver or merchant prince or ambitious lord. He was something Westeros hadn't seen in generations, a warrior who didn't fear dragons because he'd faced worse and survived. "Next time I come," Daenerys said, standing with help from her guards, pride forcing strength into her voice even as fear crept into her heart, "I'll bring all 3 dragons, and you won't be fast enough to dodge them all." "Looking forward to it," Ragnar replied, and the terrible thing was, he meant it. As Daenerys remounted Drogon and retreated to plan a better assault, as her Unsullied pulled back to regroup, as King's Landing watched a foreign raider survive what should have killed him, Ragnar stood in the courtyard, smoke still rising from his clothes, and smiled, because he'd just proven something crucial. Dragons were beatable, and once people knew dragons could be beaten, everything changed. Jon Snow arrived at King's Landing's gates 3 days after Daenerys's failed assault, and he arrived differently. No dragons, no grand display of power, just 2,000 northern soldiers, battle-hardened from fighting wildlings and worse, marching in disciplined columns that spoke of warriors who'd learned that survival mattered more than glory. And unlike Daenerys, Jon didn't demand entry or threaten fire. He requested parley. Ragnar, intrigued by the novelty of an enemy who asked permission, agreed to meet outside the walls, neutral ground where neither side held advantage. Tyrion, serving as reluctant intermediary, arranged the meeting in the ruins of an old sept half a mile from the city gates. "He's different from the Dragon Queen," Tyrion warned Ragnar as they rode toward the meeting. "Jon Snow doesn't want the throne. He doesn't care about politics or power. He fights because he believes it's right, which makes him more dangerous in ways you might not expect." "A warrior with principles?" Ragnar smiled. "Those are the most interesting kind. They can't be bought or threatened, only respected or killed." They found Jon waiting in the sept's remains, standing alone despite his army visible in the distance. He wore simple leather and furs, practical clothing for someone who'd learned that northern winters cared nothing for appearances. His hand rested on his sword's pommel, but not threateningly, just ready. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that Tyrion, watching from a careful distance, couldn't quite define. Recognition, perhaps. So the acknowledgement between two men who'd both killed and nearly died enough times to understand violence's true cost. "You're the Viking," Jon said. "Not a question, statement." "And you're the bastard who became a king," Ragnar replied, studying Jon with the same intensity he'd shown Drogon. "Interesting. In my homeland, bastards rarely rise to power. Too many legitimate heirs standing in the way." "They all died," Jon said flatly. "I didn't want the crown. It was given because no one else survived to wear it." "The best kind of king," Ragnar observed, surprising everyone, including himself. "The ones who rule because they must, not because they want to." He circled Jon slowly, not threatening but assessing. "So if you don't want power, why are you here? Why march on King's Landing when you should be preparing for your army of the dead?" "Because you've destabilized everything," Jon replied, turning to keep Ragnar in view. "The lords of Westeros are panicking. Some want to ally with Daenerys against you. Others want to use you against her. Meanwhile, the real threat marches south, and no one's paying attention because they're too busy trying to reclaim a throne that won't matter when winter comes." "Then why not let me keep it?" Ragnar stopped circling, facing Jon directly. "If the throne doesn't matter and the dead are coming, why waste warriors fighting me?" "Because you don't understand what's at stake." Jon's gray eyes, stark eyes though he didn't know how truly stark, held something that made even Ragnar pause. "You think this is about conquest and glory? You think defeating dragons and sitting on that chair makes you a legend. But I've stood on the wall. I've faced the Night King. I've watched men braver than either of us die in seconds against an enemy that doesn't tire, doesn't negotiate, and doesn't stop." He stepped closer, and Ragnar recognized something in that movement. Not aggression, but desperate urgency. "You're a brilliant warrior," Jon continued. "Maybe the best I've ever seen. Your conquest of King's Landing will be studied for generations. But Ragnar, and the use of his name, personal and direct, carried weight. All of that means nothing if we don't survive what's coming. And we won't survive if we're fighting each other when the real enemy arrives." Ragnar studied this man who'd marched not to conquer but to warn, who'd set aside pride and politics to focus on survival. In Jon Snow, he saw something he'd rarely encountered, a warrior whose greatest strength wasn't skill with weapons, but clarity about what actually mattered. "You want me to join your fight," Ragnar said, "against these dead things." "I want you to stop making mine harder," Jon corrected. "Keep King's Landing if you want it that badly. Sit on the throne. Call yourself king or conqueror or whatever Vikings call their leaders. But when the Night King comes, and he will come, stand with us instead of against us. Because if we fall fighting each other, the dead won't discriminate between Westerosi and Viking when they add our corpses to their army." Silence filled the ruined sept. Tyrion held his breath, recognizing this as the moment where Ragnar's entire invasion could pivot from disaster to unexpected alliance. But then Ragnar laughed, not mockingly, with genuine appreciation. "You're trying to manipulate me," he said, but without anger. "Not through threats or bribes, but through logic, through appealing to my survival instinct. Very clever, Jon Snow." "I'm trying to save lives," Jon countered, "including yours. The Night King isn't like any enemy you've faced. He's not a rival warrior or a political opponent. He's extinction itself, and he's coming whether you believe in him or not. Ragnar considered this, his mind weighing options with the tactical precision that had conquered cities. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He extended his hand in the Viking tradition of respect between warriors. "I don't kneel," Ragnar said clearly. "I won't swear oaths to you or your queen or anyone, but I'll stand with you. When your dead king comes, I'll fight him. Not for Westeros, I don't care about your kingdoms, but because a warrior who passes up the chance to face an unkillable enemy is a warrior who's already dead inside." Jon clasped the offered hand, and Tyrion released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "One condition," Ragnar added, his grip tightening. "When we fight this Night King, I face him directly, champion to champion. I want to look into the eyes of something that conquered death itself." "You'll die," Jon said bluntly. "He's killed better warriors than either of us." "Probably," Ragnar agreed, grinning. "But the gods love a good story. And what better tale than the Viking who conquered King's Landing, survived Dragonfire, and fought death itself?" He released Jon's hand. "Besides, I came to Westeros looking for a challenge worthy of legend. Your Night King sounds perfect." As they walked back toward their respective forces, not allies exactly, but no longer enemies, Tyrion fell into step beside Ragnar. "You realize Daenerys won't accept this alliance," the dwarf pointed out. "She still wants you dead and her throne back." "Then she'll have to wait her turn," Ragnar replied, watching Jon Snow ride back toward his northern army. "That man," he gestured at the departing figure, "he's the first person in Westeros who's made sense. No games, no politics, just survival. And you respect that." "I understand it," Ragnar corrected. "The Dragon Queen wants her throne back because she believes it's owed to her. The Southern Lords want me gone because I disrupted their comfortable chaos. But Jon Snow, he just wants to keep people alive." He smiled grimly. "That's a goal I can work with." "Until the Night King is defeated," Tyrion pressed. "Then what? You and Jon fight over who rules the Ashes?" Ragnar looked at the dwarf with something approaching respect. "You know what I've learned about this land of yours? Everyone's so focused on ruling it, they've forgotten why anyone would want to. But Jon Snow, he doesn't want to rule. He wants to protect. There's a difference." He turned back toward King's Landing, toward the throne he'd claimed but didn't need, toward the city he'd conquered but didn't love. "When the dead are defeated, if we survive, we'll figure out what comes next. But first," his smile returned, sharp and dangerous. "First, I get to fight death itself, and if the gods are kind, I'll finally find the ending worthy of the legend."
Did you catch what Ragnar just did there? Because Jon Snow came to him with logic, with urgency, with the weight of an entire dying world on his shoulders, and Ragnar's response was to laugh. Not because he didn't understand, because he understood perfectly, and he still made it about the fight. Here's my honest take. Ragnar didn't agree to face the Night King to save Westeros. He agreed because he finally found something that might actually be able to kill him. That tells you everything about this man. He's not a hero looking for a cause. He's a warrior who's been bored his whole life and just found the only opponent worth dying for. So the real question isn't whether he survives the Night King. It's what happens to a man like Ragnar if he wins and has nothing left to conquer.
Behind them, unknown to either warrior, other forces were moving. Daenerys was regrouping her dragons for another assault. The Night King was drawing closer, patient and inevitable as winter itself. And in the shadows, other players watched and planned and prepared for the moment when these forces would collide in the most devastating battle Westeros had ever witnessed. The alliance was fragile, temporary, built on mutual necessity rather than trust. But it was a start, and sometimes a start was all legends needed to change the world. The War Council convened in King's Landing's throne room 3 days later, and the gathering was unprecedented in Westeros's bloody history. At one end, Daenerys Targaryen, Mother of Dragons, surrounded by unsullied commanders and advisors, her dragons circling the Red Keep like flying fortresses. She'd agreed to this meeting only after Jon Snow rode to her camp personally, convincing her that killing Ragnar could wait until after they survived the greater threat. At the other end, Ragnar Lothbrok, sitting casually on the Iron Throne, a provocation that made Daenerys's jaw clench, flanked by his Viking warriors who looked like they'd walked out of nightmares, all leather and furs and cold efficiency. In the middle, Jon Snow and Tyrion Lannister, the unlikely architects of this impossible alliance, standing before a massive map of Westeros where markers indicated the Night King's advancing army. "They'll reach King's Landing in 2 weeks," Jon said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd actually fought the dead and lived. "Maybe less if they don't stop to convert every village between here and the Wall. And make no mistake," he looked at each faction leader in turn, "this isn't a force you negotiate with or intimidate. They are extinction walking. They don't stop, they don't tire, and every person they kill joins their army." "How many?" Ragnar asked, leaning forward with genuine interest rather than concern. "At the Wall, 50,000, maybe more, but that was before they marched south through dozens of settlements." Jon's expression darkened. "By the time they reach here, could be twice that. 100,000 corpses that don't feel pain, don't fear death, and follow commands perfectly." 100,000 against our combined forces, Daenerys calculated, her strategic mind engaged despite her hatred of having to work with the Viking who'd stolen her throne. "I have 8,000 unsullied 3 dragons. Jon has 2,000 northern warriors, and you," she looked at Ragnar with barely contained disgust, "have what? 50 raiders and a city full of guards who follow you out of fear." "Actually," Tyrion interjected before Ragnar could respond, "he has approximately 3,000 soldiers now. The Lannister forces, City Watch, and various mercenary companies have decided that following him is preferable to dying." He said it with the bitter tone of someone watching his family's legacy crumble. Fear is an excellent motivator. So 13,000 living soldiers against 100,000 dead ones, Ragnar summarized, standing from the throne and approaching the map. "Terrible odds, I love it." "This isn't a game," Jon snapped, his patience fraying. "These aren't warriors seeking glory or conquest. They're an existential threat that requires we abandon conventional tactics," Ragnar interrupted, studying the map with the focus he'd shown when planning King's Landing's conquest. "I understand perfectly, Jon Snow. You think because I joke that I don't grasp the stakes. But I've faced impossible odds before. The difference is, I'm still here." He traced a finger along the map, following the routes the Night King's army would likely take. They'll march straight for population centers, maximum bodies to convert, which means, he tapped King's Landing, they'll hit us here, in this overcrowded city full of civilians who will panic and die and swell their ranks. We evacuate, Daenerys said immediately. Clear the city, fight them in open ground where my dragons have clear targets. No, Ragnar countered, and the certainty in his voice made everyone look up. We use the city, channel them into killing zones, make them pay for every street. Your dragons provide support from above, while ground forces hold choke points. You want to defend a siege against enemies that don't need food, water, or sleep? Daenerys's laugh was sharp. That's suicide. Only if we defend forever, Ragnar agreed. But we're not defending. We're buying time for the real attack. He looked at Jon. You said they have a leader, this Night King. Kill him. And what happens? Jon hesitated, remembering Sam's research, remembering the ancient texts. The White Walkers are his lieutenants. Kill him and they fall. Kill them and the Whites, the regular dead, they fall too. It's all connected through him. Then the battle's simple, Ragnar said, and several people made sounds of protest at calling any of this simple. We hold the city long enough to draw him into range. Your dragons focus on him exclusively. Ground forces keep his army busy, and if the dragons fail, he met Jon's eyes, then warriors go in close and finish what fire started. The Night King killed a dragon last time, Jon said quietly. Viserion. He threw an ice spear that... He stopped, seeing Daenerys's face go pale. He killed one of my children, she whispered, the grief raw despite weeks past. Turned him into something monstrous, used him against us. Silence filled the throne room as the weight of that revelation settled. Then we don't give him the chance, Ragnar said, his voice carrying surprising gentleness. Your dragons stay high, strike fast, never let him target them properly. Meanwhile, ground forces push toward his position, create chaos, divide his attention. He looked around the room at the assembled leaders. This isn't about holding ground or winning territory. It's about one thing, killing their king before they kill us all. And if we fail, Tyrion asked, voicing what everyone was thinking, if the Night King reaches King's Landing and we can't stop him, then we die, Ragnar said simply. But we die fighting, and we take as many of those dead bastards with us as possible. Make them remember, he smiled grimly, that the living don't go quietly. Daenerys studied this foreign raider who'd stolen her throne and somehow, impossibly, was now planning to defend it against an enemy far worse than either of them. She hated him, wanted him dead, wanted her throne back and Westeros restored to Targaryen rule. But she also recognized strategic brilliance when she heard it. The dragon's support from altitude, she agreed reluctantly. But I lead my unsullied forces personally. I don't hide in safety while my soldiers die. I wouldn't expect you to, Ragnar replied, offering respect she didn't want but couldn't deny. You walked through fire and survived. You've earned the right to face death without flinching. The north holds the eastern walls, Jon added, moving markers on the map. We've fought them before, yet we know their patterns. And my forces take the main gates, Ragnar concluded. Let them throw themselves against Vikings who've conquered cities and Lannister soldiers fighting for survival. We'll make them pay for every inch. Tyrion looked at the assembled commanders, Dragon Queen, Northern King, Viking Raider, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Fragile hope, built on necessity and mutual survival instinct, but hope nonetheless. "We have 2 weeks to prepare," he said. 2 weeks to fortify positions, evacuate non-combatants, and turn King's Landing into a fortress that even the dead will struggle to break." "And then?" Daenerys asked. "And then," Ragnar replied, his eyes blazing with the anticipation of someone about to face the ultimate challenge. "Here we find out if death itself can be killed." The council dispersed, each faction to their preparations, but Jon lingered as Ragnar studied the map alone. "You know we're probably going to die," Jon said quietly. "All of us. Even if we kill the Night King, the cost will be devastating," Ragnar finished. "I know, but Jon, I came to Westeros looking for something worth fighting for, worth dying for, and this..." He gestured at the map, at the approaching threat. "This is it. Not a throne, not a crown, but the chance to stand against extinction itself and say, 'No, not today.'" He looked at Jon with something approaching friendship. "Win or lose, we'll be legends. The alliance that should never have existed. The Dragon Queen, the Northern King, and the Viking Raider who stood together when the long night came." He smiled. "The gods will tell our story for 1,000 years. I'd rather survive to tell it ourselves," Jon replied. "Where's the fun in that?" Ragnar laughed. "But yes, survival would be nice. So let's give those dead bastards a fight they'll remember." "They're dead," Jon pointed out. "They don't remember anything. Then we'll make the survivors remember for them." As Jon left to prepare his forces, Ragnar stood alone in the throne room, looking at the Iron Throne that had started all this, that had drawn him across an ocean seeking challenges worthy of legend. He'd conquered it, proven it was just an uncomfortable chair, and now he was going to defend it against an enemy that made dragons look tame. The irony wasn't lost on him. Neither was the terrifying excitement. Because Ragnar Lothbrok had spent his entire life seeking the perfect death, the battle that would end his story in glory. And the Night King was coming to give it to him. The dead arrived on the 14th day, and they arrived like winter itself. Inevitable, silent, unstoppable. From the Red Keep's walls, the defenders watched the horizon turn white with corpses. 100,000 whites moving in perfect synchronization, their glowing blue eyes visible even from miles away. Their collective silence somehow more terrifying than any war cry could have been. Behind them, riding dead horses, the White Walkers advanced, 11 of them, lieutenants of the Night King, each one ancient and terrible and capable of killing dozens of warriors before falling. And at their center, on a dead horse that had once been magnificent, the Night King himself rode toward King's Landing with the patience of something that had waited 8,000 years and could wait 8,000 more. "Gods," Tyrion whispered from the battlements, watching death approach in organized waves. The reports didn't capture how many. "Reports never do," Jon said grimly, checking his sword. Longclaw, one of the few weapons forged with dragonglass that could actually kill White Walkers. "This is what they looked like at the wall before we lost." On the opposite wall, Daenerys stood with her unsullied commanders, watching her children circle overhead. Drogon, Rhaegal, and the memory of Viserion, killed and turned by the very enemy now approaching. She'd already cried those tears. Now was time for fire. And at the main gates, Ragnar stood with his Vikings and the combined Lannister forces, studying the approaching army with tactical focus rather than fear. Around him, warriors shifted nervously. They'd fought men, fought for gold and glory and survival, but never faced something like this. "Steady," Ragnar commanded, his voice carrying authority that cut through their fear. "They look unstoppable, probably are, but we're going to kill them anyway because that's what warriors do. We face impossible odds and make them possible through skill and courage and sheer bloody-minded refusal to die quietly." He drew his sword, a good Westerosi blade, not the weapons of his homeland, but steel was steel when properly used. They can't feel fear, can't be demoralized, can't break ranks, but they also can't adapt, can't think creatively, can't do anything except follow orders. He grinned, fierce and wild. "We're going to teach them why the living will always be more dangerous than the dead." The army of whites hit the outer defenses like a frozen tsunami. Trenches filled with wildfire ignited, turning thousands of corpses to ash in seconds. Arrows tipped with dragonglass rained down from the walls, each one dropping a white permanently, and above it all, dragons unleashed fire that turned entire sections of the dead army to burning wreckage. But they kept coming. For every 100 that fell, 10 reached the walls. For every section destroyed by dragonfire, another filled the gap. They climbed over their own burning dead, using corpses as ladders, throwing themselves at the defenses with mindless determination. "Second wave," Jon shouted as whites breached the eastern wall, pouring through a section weakened by siege ladders made of frozen bodies. Northern warriors met them with dragonglass and Valyrian steel, fighting in tight formations that kept the dead from overwhelming through numbers alone. But the dead didn't tire, didn't stop, didn't feel pain when limbs were severed. They fought until destroyed completely, and destroying them took precious time the defenders didn't have. On the western front, Daenerys guided Drogon in another pass, incinerating a White Walker and watching with grim satisfaction as dozens of whites connected to it, collapsed like puppets with cut strings. But there were too many. Even with 3 dragons unleashing constant fire, the dead kept advancing. "Your Grace!" an unsullied commander shouted from below. "They're breaking through the river gate. We need—" His words cut off as a white dragged him down. Daenerys watched helplessly from above, saw her disciplined, unsullied fighting brilliantly but losing ground meter by meter against an enemy that never stopped coming. At the main gate, Ragnar's prediction proved horribly accurate. The whites threw themselves at the defenses in waves, and each wave wore down the defenders a little more. Vikings fought with berserker fury, Lannister soldiers with desperate courage, but exhaustion was claiming them while the dead felt nothing. "Fall back to second positions," Ragnar ordered, his sword arm numb from constant killing, his armor covered in frozen blood. "Controlled retreat. Make them pay for every street." They pulled back, using the city's narrow lanes as killing zones, forcing the dead to funnel into spaces where superior numbers meant less. It was working, barely, but Ragnar knew the mathematics. They were killing thousands. But thousands more kept coming, and somewhere in that frozen horde, the Night King was advancing toward the Red Keep, protected by his White Walker Guard, waiting for the moment to strike. "There!" Jon shouted from the battlements, pointing toward a section where whites were parting like water. The Night King rode through the gap, his ice-blue eyes fixed on the Red Keep with ancient patience. Around him, his White Walker lieutenants formed a protective ring. Daenerys saw him too, saw the creature that had killed Viserion, felt rage and grief surge through her like wildfire. "Drogon, dive," she commanded, guiding her largest child into a screaming descent directly toward the Night King. This was the moment. Kill him, and the entire army falls. End this nightmare in one strike. She saw the Night King raise his arm, saw something materialize in his hand. An ice spear, impossibly sharp, gleaming with frozen malice, saw him draw back to throw. "No!" someone screamed. Maybe her, maybe Jon, maybe all of them simultaneously. The spear flew with impossible speed and accuracy, aimed not at Drogon, but at Rhaegal, who'd flanked to provide support. It struck the green dragon's wing, tearing through scale and bone, and Rhaegal screamed, a sound that would haunt every survivor. As he plummeted from the sky, he crashed into King's Landing's northern sector, demolishing buildings, crushing defenders and whites alike, and lay still. Daenerys felt part of her soul tear away. 2 children now, 2 dragons killed by this monster, 2 pieces of her heart ripped out and destroyed. "Pull back," Tyrion was shouting from somewhere. "Get the dragons to safety." "We can't lose!" But Daenerys wasn't listening. Grief and rage had merged into something primal. She pulled Drogon around for another attack. Damn the danger, damn the risk. She was going to burn the Night King to ash, or die trying. A hand grabbed Drogon's reins from below. Ragnar had somehow climbed the dragon mid-flight, was clinging to the saddle with one hand while gripping the reins with the other, his eyes blazing with something between madness and clarity. "Get him close!" Ragnar shouted over the wind and battle noise. "Low pass, I'm going in." "You'll die!" Daenerys screamed back. "Probably," Ragnar grinned, that insane Viking grin. "But I didn't cross an ocean to miss the best fight of my life. Get me close to that ice bastard and I'll show him what mortals can do." For one heartbeat, Daenerys considered throwing him off, letting him fall, reclaiming her dragon and her throne and her revenge. But she saw something in his eyes, the same desperate fury she felt, the same refusal to let monsters win, the same willingness to die if it meant taking the enemy with them. She adjusted Drogon's dive, swooping low over the Night King's position, and Ragnar Lothbrok, Viking raider, conqueror of cities, the man who'd stolen her throne, let go. He fell 20 feet, hit the ground rolling, came up with sword drawn, and charged directly at the Night King, surrounded by White Walkers and 10,000 whites. It was suicide. It was insane. It was exactly the kind of glorious madness that legends were made from. And as the defenders watched, as Jon Snow realized what was happening, as Daenerys pulled Drogon around for another pass, Ragnar Lothbrok crashed into the Night King's guard like a thunderbolt, and the battle's outcome suddenly balanced on the edge of a blade wielded by a man who'd never learned when to surrender. Ragnar hit the ground in the middle of the Night King's guard, and immediately understood why no one had survived this before. White Walkers moved with speed that defied their ancient appearance. Ice blades materialized in their hands, not steel but frozen malice that shattered normal weapons on contact. The nearest one swung at Ragnar's head with killing precision. He ducked, rolled, came up inside the creature's guard and drove his sword. Valyrian steel, one of the few materials that could actually harm them, through its chest. The White Walker shattered like frozen glass, and dozens of whites connected to it collapsed instantly. 10 more White Walkers remained, and the Night King himself, watching with those blue eyes that had witnessed civilizations rise and fall. "Come on," Ragnar roared, dodging another ice blade. His Viking training and a lifetime of impossible battles keeping him alive through pure instinct. "He crossed an ocean for this. Don't disappoint me." A White Walker's blade grazed his shoulder, and the cold that radiated from it was beyond anything natural. Cold that froze blood in veins, that stopped hearts, that killed through touch alone. Ragnar felt his left arm go numb, but kept fighting, kept moving, because stopping meant death, and death meant failure. Above, Drogon unleashed fire that incinerated 3 White Walkers simultaneously, their destruction causing a cascade of white collapses throughout the army. Jon Snow had fought his way through the horde, Longclaw cutting through the dead with desperate efficiency, trying to reach Ragnar's position before the Vikings' luck ran out. But it was Daenerys who saw it first, saw the Night King raise his hand toward Drogon, saw another ice spear materialize, saw her last child about to die like his brothers. "Dive!" she screamed, yanking the reins hard. Drogon twisted mid-flight as the spear launched, and instead of striking true, it grazed his wing. Painful, but not fatal. The dragon roared fury and pain, but stayed airborne, stayed fighting. And that moment of distraction, that split second when the Night King's attention shifted to his failed throw, was all Ragnar needed. He burst through the remaining White Walker guard, took a blade through his side that froze flesh and cracked ribs, ignored the screaming pain because pain was temporary and legends were forever, and drove his sword with every ounce of strength toward the Night King's chest. The blade struck. Valyrian steel met ancient ice magic in a collision that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. For one impossible moment, everything froze. The Night King looked down at the sword buried in his chest, looked at the mortal who'd somehow reached him, looked at Ragnar with something that might have been surprise or respect or simply acknowledgement that after 8,000 years, he'd finally been bested. Then he shattered, not slowly, not dramatically, simply ceased to exist, breaking apart into ice crystals that scattered on the wind like snowflakes in reverse. And with him went the White Walkers, all of them, simultaneously, shattering like frozen glass across the battlefield. And with the White Walkers went the Whites, 100,000 corpses that had been animated by dark magic suddenly collapsing like puppets with cut strings, a falling in waves that spread from the Night King's position outward across all of King's Landing. The battle ended not with a final clash, but with sudden, absolute silence. Defenders who'd been fighting for their lives stood frozen in shock, weapons raised against enemies that no longer moved. The dead, the countless dead that had nearly overwhelmed them, simply lay still, returned to the permanent death they should have found years or centuries ago. Ragnar collapsed to his knees, the ice blade's wound in his side, killing him slowly but surely, frost spreading through his veins in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't lethal. Jon reached him first, dropping beside the Viking who'd done the impossible. "You're dying," he said unnecessarily. I know, Ragnar replied, coughing blood that steamed in the cold air. Good death, though. Died killing extinction itself. The Scalds will sing about this one. Daenerys landed Drogon nearby, dismounting and approaching with an expression impossible to read. Gratitude, grief, rage, respect, all warring for dominance. You saved us, she said finally. Saved Westeros. Saved... She trailed off, looking at Rhaegal's fallen form, at the cost this victory had demanded. Saved your throne, too, Ragnar managed a weak smile. It's yours again. I'm done with it. Never wanted the damn thing anyway. Just wanted to prove it wasn't worth dying for. Then was it? Tyrion asked, arriving with other survivors, his face showing the exhaustion of someone who'd orchestrated defense while watching friends die. Was any of this worth it? Ragnar looked around at the battlefield, at the thousands of dead defenders, at the fallen dragon, at the ruined city that had barely survived extinction. Then he looked at the survivors, northern warriors and unsullied and Vikings and Lannister soldiers standing together, having faced the worst the world could throw at them and survived through cooperation none of them would have believed possible weeks ago. Yes, he said simply, because you'll remember when you rebuild, when you fight over that throne again, and you will. You'll remember that once, when it truly mattered, you stood together, and maybe, he coughed more blood, maybe that memory will matter more than any crown. His vision was fading, the ice spreading to his heart, but he was smiling, genuinely smiling. Tell my warriors. He looked at Bjorn and Floki, who'd fought their way to his side. Tell them their king died in glory. It killed an unkillable enemy, saved a world that wasn't even ours. He gripped Jon's shoulder with his remaining strength. That's a saga worth singing, yes? The best, Jon replied quietly, and he meant it. Dragon Queen, Ragnar turned to Daenerys. Your throne is waiting. Rule it better than those who came before. Remember what you fought for today. I will, she promised. And surprisingly, she meant it too. Ragnar Lothbrok, Viking raider, conqueror of King's Landing, the man who'd proven thrones were just furniture and then defended one anyway, died as the sun rose over King's Landing, not in his homeland, not among his people, but surrounded by warriors who'd learned to respect him, in a city he'd conquered and saved in equal measure, having accomplished something no legend in any culture had ever managed. He'd killed winter itself. And as his body cooled and his warriors began their death songs, as the survivors started the impossible task of counting their dead and rebuilding their shattered city, as Daenerys reclaimed her throne and Jon prepared to return north, and Tyrion wondered what came next, they all understood something fundamental had changed. The Game of Thrones would continue, politics would resume, the struggle for power would rebuild itself like it always did. But they'd seen what happened when they stood together against true darkness. They'd learned that sometimes survival mattered more than victory, and that legends could come from the most unexpected places. A foreign raider had taught them that, and Westeros would never forget. Ragnar Lothbrok entered Westeros as an invader, a man who didn't believe in kings, who saw thrones as weakness, who conquered King's Landing in a single night through cunning that made armies irrelevant. He proved the Iron Throne was just an uncomfortable chair, survived Dragonfire through audacity, faced the Mother of Dragons, and lived. allied with the North not through treaty but mutual respect. And when death itself marched on King's Landing, when extinction came calling in the form of the Night King and 100,000 corpses, when all of Westeros stood on the brink of annihilation, he charged. One man against the unkillable, one mortal against ancient evil, one Viking who refused to let death be the end of the story. And he won. The cost was devastating. Thousands dead, a dragon fallen, a city in ruins. And Ragnar himself dying from wounds that no healer could cure, his saga ending far from the home he'd left to seek glory. But his legend would live forever. The man who conquered King's Landing, who survived dragons, who killed the Night King, who proved that sometimes the greatest warriors aren't those who seek power, but those willing to sacrifice everything to stop extinction. Daenerys would rebuild her rule. Jon would return north to his people. The Game of Thrones would continue with new players and old grudges, but they would all remember the Viking, remember the alliance that shouldn't have existed. Remember that when it truly mattered, when the world stood at the edge of the long night, they'd stood together. And sometimes, just sometimes, that memory would matter more than any throne. Ragnar Lothbrok had asked if Westeros was worth conquering. In the end, he'd proven it was worth saving, even if the cost was everything.
When Ragnar grabbed those reins mid-flight and just let go 20 feet above the Night King's guard, I need somebody to talk to about that moment. And then dying with a smile. Not asking to be saved, just making sure the people around him would remember to fight better than they had before. That hit different. I want to know, what moment in this story actually stopped you? Was it Ragnar charging through Dragonfire?